Okay, everybody, today's lecture is going to be on the three theories or three theoretical orientations that you're going to read about in your textbook. But what I'm going to do today is, well, let me tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to regurgitate everything that's in the textbook on these theories. I'm going to leave that to you in your study. I am going to emphasize a few things about those theories. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and origins of sociology and the sociological theories that have emerged as a response to American sociology. And then I want to talk about why these theories are important. Most intro sociology classes actually spend a good deal of time on these theories. I only spend 1 week, one module, because I'd rather get to some of the social problems that presumably most of you are interested in talking about and thinking about when you signed up for this course. And again, I'm going to leave it to you to read some of the details about these theories, which are testable on the exams and assignments, but I'm just not going to go into much detail here in this video lecture. So let me start by saying kind of what I want to emphasize about these three theoretical orientations or three theoretical perspectives. First of all, we're talking about functionalism, conflict, and symbolic interactionism. Okay, functionalism as a theory, conflict theory as a theory, and symbolic interactionism, which I'll plug into some examples in a minute here. I want to give you some backdrop, though, about where these theories come from and how they came to be used in my field of sociology. You'll notice from the slides, and I have them up here already, that there's some talk about early sociology in the U.S., and certainly that's the case of how theories developed in this country. They developed in urban areas, and particularly at the point in our American history when cities were emerging. This is the period that you've most likely referred to as the Industrial Revolution. And this is late 1700s, 1800s, mid-18 to late 1800s, more precisely, where cities began to form. Places like Chicago, New York, and even places like Philadelphia, even in other places like Miami and Los Angeles, when immigrants from all walks of life, from all these different countries, came together, immigrated to the United States to pave their way in this world. We are a nation of immigrants, and as we collected during this period to get these new industrial jobs, conflicts emerged. Specifically, different cultures competing with one another over these jobs resulted in cultural tension and other manifestations that we now see in a lot of urban areas today, friction between different kinds of people from different places, crime and deviance, for example. And so sociology came into the fore to sort of analyze and understand better what was going on with these conflicts in these urban areas and what was happening with the Industrial Revolution itself. And so we refer to in sociology the Chicago School, which is really the emergence of real sociological theory in this country, and indeed it was at the University of Chicago, obviously in Chicago. And some of the names associated with this period in history are also some of the big names in sociology even today, some of them that you'll see in our PowerPoint slides and in your readings. I'm not going to go into detail about these specific theorists, but I will mention a few who are tied to some of these theories. The only thing I would say is, and I can't get my slides to advance, but I have a pet peeve about pronunciation of some of these theorists. In the slides, I apologize, I can't advance right now, but you'll see names like Auguste Comte, and that's how you pronounce it. You'll see a guy by the name of W.E.B. Du Bois. It's not Du Bois, it's Du Bois. And the one that really gets me, that even I've heard sociologists mispronounce, is Max Weber, the German sociologist associated with functionalism, It's W-E-B-E-R. It looks like Weber or Weber. His name is pronounced Weber, right? Max Weber is his name. You might mistake the other functionalist who's pronounced Emil Durkheim. You might hear it pronounced Emily, like he's a woman or something. And I don't want you to make that mistake going forward. You read about these theorists, but you never hear them pronounced. Those are the correct pronunciations. Just my little pet peeve. I should say I sort of made a joke about mistaking Emil Durkheim as Emily Durkheim for chastising womanhood. And I don't want to do that at all, but it is true that most of the early sociologists were identified as male. Men. You'll see Harriet Martineau in there, who's usually associated with discipline of social work, but we claim her as a sociologist, along with other big names in the field like Karl Marx. But certainly they're not all men. There are many prominent women in our discipline, dating back to the early stages of sociology. You do some deeper reading and see that. And then some of the interactionists, you've got George Herbert Mead and Bloomer, Denson, and some others that I'll just mention in passing. I'm going to run out of time if I get into it. Okay, so here's what I want to say about the theories more generally. First of all, what is the difference between these three theories? Or what I should say more correctly, these three theoretical orientations. There's a lot of sub-theories underneath each of these. A deeper look, if you ever take a sociology theory class, you're going to get inundated with dozens and dozens of theorists and theories. But in intro classes, we generally categorize them into three orientations. Again, functionalism, conflict, and symbolic interactionism. Let me start with functionalism. And without getting, again, into a great detail on this, I want to make the point that functionalism starts with the premise that social order is good, that society needs to function, hence the word functionalism. That we need order, we need stability, we need rules, we need stable norms in society, right? This is the general premise of that orientation, that society needs to function. And it dates back to a guy by the name of Herbert Spencer, who talked a lot about likening this tradition to an organism, or thinking of society as an organism where all the different parts of the body, for example, have to work in harmony with one another, work in conjunction with one another for the whole system to work smoothly. So if one system breaks down, it affects the entire system. So if you think about, for example, the organs in your body, your heart, your lungs, your brain, we've got a nervous system, a pulmonary cardiovascular system, a skeletal system. If any one of these breaks down, your whole body breaks down. We call that illness. Well, for a functionalist, you can think of the parts of society as the parts of the body, society like an organism, as Spencer first introduced us, where, say if there's crime in society, for example, as a social problem, or if there's environmental problems in with environmental degradation, you might liken that to one of the systems of the body weakening or falling apart and affecting the entire system. So certainly if there's a high level of crime in a society, it's going to have an impact on every aspect of society. So we need to remedy that. We need to fix that. That's the functionalist position, that social order is essentially a good thing, and they talk about social harmony, or when there's dysfunction, another key term in this field, something needs to be rectified. We need to take action to stabilize society, to make things go smoothly. Now, in total contrast to that is conflict theory. Conflict theory comes from the point of view that deviance and crime are good things because they see the system set up to have advantaged, privileged few at the top who make decisions for the rest of us, and they ask the question, who made these rules? Who benefits from making this law versus that law, or enforcing one rule or law versus another? And they point to power imbalances and the fact that there are powerful people in society and powerless people, and that conflict of interest is what they focus on. So the conflict in conflict theory doesn't refer to like physical fighting or violence even, but really refers to the conflict of interest between the elites and the rest of us, the haves versus the have-nots, in Marxist terms, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, right? The working class versus the ruling class. So if you think of that dichotomous language, those the powerful versus the powerless, in any of those terms, that's what conflict theory focuses on. In contrast to these two theories is symbolic interactionism. Here is a micro theory, whereas functionalism and conflict theories we describe as macro theories because it's big picture stuff. It looks at entire social systems, right? That's the level they analyze. For interactionists, we call it a micro theory because they focus on the individual interactions between individuals. It's more like, it's the field of social psychology is what it is. Almost, if you've had any psychology, how people's interactions affect their attitudes or behaviors, the norms in society. At that level, when we're looking at those interactions between individuals or small groups, then we're talking about interactionism, who focus on things like shared meanings and exchange of ideas and communication strategies between people and how it informs them about the norms of society. So at that level, it's micro, and that's symbolic interactionism, and that's what separates it from the two macro theories I just talked about, functionalism and conflict theory. And those two, as I just mentioned, are pretty much diametrically opposed to each other in terms of the nature of social order and how to consider. Okay, let me give you a couple examples before I run out of time of why this stuff is useful. Like I said, I don't spend a lot of time on theory, but you need to know this, especially because I want you to be thinking like a sociologist, and I want you to be able to see social dynamics on multiple levels, the macro and the micro. So for functionalism, for example, we could look at education. Let's just consider education for a minute. A functionalist would say things like education provides a equal opportunity for everyone. Everyone can go to school, presumably. Everyone can go to college. It raises the boat, so everyone, it lifts a rising tide lifts all boats, right, is the expression. The idea that education is the great equalizer is another functionalist idea, that it's a way of raising everyone or providing a level playing field, and that's functional for society and produces fair, equitable chances for success, right? But of course, we also know from a conflict perspective, education isn't equal. Some schools are better than others. We fund them on the local tax base, so if you grow up in a crappy neighborhood, you're more likely to go to a crappy school. You're not going to have you're going to have textbooks from 1972, bullets whizzing over your head. Think of these urban school systems that are poorly funded and all the problems they have, and how hard it is for someone to get a legitimate education in these places. A conflict theorist draws attention to that fact and points to the fact that someone somewhere, some group somewhere, made a decision not to provide equal education for everyone in the country. Again, powerful interests maintaining their privilege at the top, keeping other people from attaining that kind of education. We can't all go to Harvard because we can't all afford it, right? This kind of thinking is a conflict perspective. And then for an interactionist, the example with education again would be looking at what goes on in education. What are teachers teaching? There's a term we use for this that's honestly usually associated with conflict theory. It's called the hidden curriculum. But we can use it here to understand interactionism, because what we're talking about is the fact that there are things we teach in schools, especially grade school, that have nothing to do with reading, writing, and arithmetic. It has to do with, saying being patriotic in class and chanting the national anthem before classes begin, teaching you when the bell rings you got to get to your next class. We talk about this as an example of teaching obedience, because we're really preparing you for the workforce later once you get used to following an orderly day, right? There are things we teach that have nothing to do with the content of the class, but how people are supposed to engage each other either in school or later in the workforce. It shapes meanings in society, what education's role is, and what we learn, for example, about men and women in terms of traditional gender roles. Teachers in schools at all levels give more attention to boys. They're more likely to steer girls and young women into, like, for example, lower professions more appropriate to their gender, like nursing instead of becoming a doctor. These kinds of interactions between teachers and students that shape these attitudes at the micro level are interactionist principles that work that we can use to describe something like education. And of course, we could also look at other institutions like the media. What's the role of the media? Is it to transmit information simply, or does it transmit certain messages by certain individuals at the top, things they want us to believe in, like being patriotic, for example, instead of questioning authority from a conflict perspective, and whether or not it emphasizes or exaggerates gender roles as well, like education can, in terms of teaching us what you're supposed to be like, how you're supposed to act if you're a young man or a young woman in the media. The messages and the images about what a pretty woman looks like, for example, or what a pretty girl should aspire to. These kinds of things are interactionist principles and a way of looking at that institution as well. We can apply it to other institutions, but once again, I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop now. And just wanted to just give you some examples of how we can use these three theoretical orientations to understand the social institutions we're going to start getting into in this class and subsequent modules. So I will see you next time.